A few years ago, my mom witnessed something that changed her in a way I don't think ever fully went away. It wasn't just the accident itself, but everything around it. The moments before, the moments after, and especially the things that were said while someone was dying right in front of her. It was a normal day when it happened. She was driving like she always did. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Traffic was steady, the kind of everyday movement you don't even think about. People going to work, running errands, heading home. Just another ordinary moment in the middle of a normal day. Then everything changed in a matter of seconds. At an intersection up ahead, a car came through a red light. The driver was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She had been texting. She didn't slow down. She didn't even seem aware of what was about to happen. At the same time, a truck was moving through the intersection on a green light. Inside that truck was an elderly man. He never had a chance to react. The car slammed into the side of his truck with full force. The sound of the impact was loud enough to cut through everything. Metal bending, glass breaking, the kind of noise that instantly tells you something serious has just happened. My mom didn't hesitate. She pulled over immediately and ran toward the crash. Other people were still in their cars, some slowing down, some stopping. But she didn't wait. She went straight to the truck, where the man was still inside. He was badly injured. The impact had done serious damage, and it was clear right away that he wasn't okay. But he was still alive. When my mom climbed in close to him and held on to him. There's something about moments like that where instinct takes over. You don't think about what you're supposed to do. You just do whatever you can to help. She stayed with him while waiting for the ambulance. She talked to him, tried to keep him calm, tried to keep him present. When someone is in that condition, sometimes just having another person there can make a difference, even if it doesn't change the outcome. Meanwhile, the girl who caused the accident was nearby. She was panicking. She had realized what she had done, and it hit her all at once. She was crying, shaking, completely overwhelmed. In that panic, she pulled out her phone and called her mom. She didn't call for help. She called her mother. Not long after, her mom arrived at the scene. And that's when things took a turn that made the whole situation even worse. Instead of focusing on what had happened, instead of showing concern for the man who was dying, she immediately started trying to control the situation. She approached my mom and started speaking to her in a low but urgent voice. She kept saying the same thing over and over. "Just tell the cops he ran the red light." She said it like it was nothing, like it was just a simple solution. "No one will know." Those words hung in the air while my mom was still holding on to a man who was fighting for his life. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. In that moment, there was a man dying, and instead of concern, there was someone trying to rewrite what had just happened. My mom didn't respond to her. She stayed focused on the man. But she heard every word. Oh, and so did he, because he was still alive. Barely, but alive. My mom later said that he couldn't really speak, not clearly. What came out were more like sounds than words. Weak, broken attempts to say something, anything. She stayed with him through it, through those final moments, and then he died. Right there. The ambulance arrived, but it was too late. For days after, my mom couldn't stop thinking about it. She cried more than I had ever seen her cry before. Not just because someone had died, but because of everything surrounding it. The way it happened, the way it ended, the things that were said while it was happening. She kept repeating the sounds he made in those last moments. Not actual words, just the sounds. It stuck with her. The human mind doesn't always process trauma in a clean way. Sometimes it loops the same moment over and over again, trying to make sense of it. She later met the man's family. That made it even harder. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was a husband, a man with a life, with people who loved him. It turned out that it was a special day for him and his wife. An anniversary, or something close to it. That detail made everything heavier. It meant that what should have been a happy day had turned into something devastating. Of course, when the police arrived, the truth was told. My mom made sure of that. She didn't hesitate. There was no question about what had happened. The girl had run the red light. That was the reality. But even after that, we never really knew what happened next. We don't know what consequences followed, or how the situation was handled in the long term. And some things just end without you ever hearing the full outcome. What stayed with us was the memory. His obituary is framed in our house. Not because we knew him before that day, but because that moment became part of our lives in a way we couldn't ignore. It's a reminder, not just of what happened, but of how quickly everything can change. And there's one part of it that still feels the hardest to accept. The thought that in his final moments, while he was still aware enough to hear what was happening around him, one of the last things he may have heard wasn't comfort. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't someone telling him help was coming. It was someone saying, "Just tell the cops this was his fault." That thought doesn't go away easily, because it says something about people, about how, even in the worst moments, some choose to protect themselves instead of facing the truth. And sometimes, that's the part that stays with you longer than anything else. A friend of mine died from a drug overdose. It's strange how something like that doesn't feel real at first. You hear the words, you understand what they mean, but it doesn't fully sink in. You expect to see them again, to get a message, to hear their voice. But it doesn't happen. And slowly, over time, the reality settles in. We had grown up together. Not just casual friends, but the kind of friendship where you share years of your life side by side. School, stupid decisions, late nights, long conversations. The kind of bond where you don't question loyalty because it's always just there. He wasn't just a friend, he was like a brother. We all were. There was a small group of us who stayed close for years. We went through everything together. Even when life started pulling people in different directions, there was always that sense that we were still connected somehow. But over time, things changed. Drugs became a bigger part of some of their lives. At first, it didn't seem like anything too serious. Just experimenting, just having fun, just pushing limits the way people sometimes do when they're young. But it didn't stay that way. For some of them, it went deeper. I could see it happening, but I never fully understood how far it had gone. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You tell yourself they'll get through it. You tell yourself they're still the same people you grew up with. And in some ways, they were. But in other ways, they weren't anymore. When he died, it hit all of us differently. The funeral was heavy. Not just sad, but confusing. You stand there looking at someone you knew your whole life, and suddenly they're gone. Just like that. No more chances to fix anything. No more time to say things you should have said. After the funeral, a mutual friend and I ended up drinking together. It wasn't planned. It just kind of happened the way these things do. You don't want to go home yet. You don't want to sit alone with your thoughts. So you stay out, you drink, and you try to process something that doesn't make sense. At first, we were just talking about him, sharing memories, laughing a little, even though it felt wrong to laugh, remembering the good times, the stupid things we did, the way he used to act. Then, at some point, the mood shifted. My friend got quiet. You could see something building up in him, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but heavy. Like there's something sitting there waiting to come out. Then he broke down. He started crying in a way I had never seen before. Not just a few tears, but real, uncontrollable emotion. The kind that comes from holding something in for too long. After a while, he looked at me and asked me something. He asked if I remembered a story they had told me years ago. It was about an accident. I thought about it for a second, and then nodded. I remembered. They had told me about witnessing a crash involving a truck driver. I didn't remember every detail, but I remembered the general story. It had sounded bad, but it was just one of those things you hear about. Something tragic, but distant. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I told him I remembered. He looked at me differently after that. There was something in his expression that made me uneasy. Like what he was about to say wasn't just another memory. And then he told me the truth. He said that what they had told me back then wasn't the full story, not even close. According to him, when that accident happened, they didn't just stand there and watch. Our friend ran toward the truck driver. The man was still alive. Dying, but alive. And instead of helping him, instead of trying to do anything to save him, our friend did something else. He took the man's wedding ring, right off his hand, while the man was still conscious. He said the man couldn't do anything. He couldn't fight back. He couldn't speak. All he could do was look up, terrified, as he realized what was happening. As he realized that in his final moments, instead of being helped, he was being robbed. I just sat there. I didn't know what to say. It didn't feel real, though the person he was describing didn't match the person I thought I knew. This was someone I grew up with, someone I trusted, someone I had shared years of my life with. And now I was hearing that in one of the worst moments imaginable, when someone needed help the most, he had chosen to do something like that. I tried to process it, but it didn't fit. It didn't make sense. But at the same time, it did. Because I had seen the changes. I had seen what the drugs were doing to them. I just never thought it could go that far. That it could change someone to the point where they would look at a dying man and see an opportunity instead of a human being. My friend kept talking, still emotional, still shaken by the memory. He said it had been eating at him for years, that he couldn't forget the look on that man's face, that he couldn't forget what they had done. And now that our friend was gone, it felt heavier somehow, like it would never be resolved, like it was just going to stay there forever. We sat there for a long time after that. Neither of us really knew what to say. The alcohol didn't help anymore. Nothing really did. Because once you hear something like that, you can't unhear it. It changes the way you see things. It changes the way you see people. For me, it changed something deeper. It made me realize that you don't always know the people you think you know. You can grow up with someone, share experiences, trust them completely, and still have no idea what they're capable of. That's the part that stayed with me. Not just what he did, but the fact that I never would have believed it if I hadn't heard it from someone who was there. Even now, I still think about it sometimes. About that moment. About that choice. About the kind of person you have to become to do something like that. And ever since then, I don't think I've ever trusted anyone the same way again. Because sometimes, the people closest to you are carrying things you would never expect. And sometimes, you only find out when it's already too late. My aunt died in a way that still doesn't feel real, even after all this time. When people talk about accidents, they usually describe them as quick, unfortunate moments. Something that happens, and then it's over. But for the people left behind, it never really ends. It stays with you in pieces, in memories, in questions, and in moments that replay in your head long after everything is supposed to be over. That day started like any other. There was nothing unusual about it. No warning signs, no feeling that something was about to go wrong. It was just another normal day, the kind that blends into every other day without standing out. My aunt was out driving, going about her routine the same way she always did. Highways are strange places when you think about it. Everything moves fast. People trust the rules, the lights, the signals. You assume everyone is paying attention, that everyone is doing what they're supposed to do, because if even one person doesn't, everything can fall apart in seconds. That's what happened. From what we were told, my aunt was driving through an intersection when another car came through a red light. The woman driving didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She just went straight through it. And then she hit my aunt's car from the side. It happened fast. Too fast for anyone to react. Too fast for my aunt to even understand what was happening. The impact was direct and violent. The kind of crash that leaves no chance to correct anything once it starts. When a car gets hit like that from the side, there's nothing protecting you the way there is in other parts of the vehicle. They told us she died instantly. And that's what people say when they're trying to soften something that can't really be softened. It's meant to bring comfort, to make it seem like there was no suffering. And maybe that part is true. But it doesn't take away from what happened. Because the impact didn't just stop her life. It caused a lot of damage. The kind that people don't want to describe out loud. The kind that makes everything feel heavier when you hear about it. We didn't see it. But we heard enough. And sometimes, hearing is enough to leave an image in your mind that you wish you could forget. There was a witness. Someone who saw the whole thing happen. That part matters more than anything. Because this wasn't a situation where no one knew what happened. It wasn't unclear. It wasn't something that could be easily questioned or misunderstood. What the witness said the same thing clearly. The woman ran the red light. There was no hesitation in that statement. No doubt. It should have been simple after that. But it wasn't. Because the woman who caused the accident had something that changed everything. Her husband was a police officer. And somehow that detail shifted the entire situation. Instead of things being straightforward, everything became uncertain. The woman claimed that my aunt was the one who ran the red light. She insisted on it, repeated it, stood by it no matter what anyone else said. And nothing was done. At least not in the way we expected. There was no clear outcome, no moment where someone said, "This is the truth, and this is what happens next." It just felt like everything disappeared into confusion, into silence, into something that never really gave us answers. And that part stayed with us, because losing someone is already hard enough. But losing someone in a way that feels unfair, in a way that feels unresolved, makes it even harder to accept. I remember the moment we found out. It's one of those memories that doesn't fade. I was outside the hospital. I don't even remember how we got there exactly. Everything from that time feels blurred together, like pieces missing from a timeline that should be clear. But I remember standing there. And I remember my mom. She was screaming and crying in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, something raw and overwhelming. The kind of pain that doesn't come out in quiet tears, but in loud, uncontrollable emotion. People were around us. Doctors, nurses, maybe other families. But none of that felt real. It was like everything else had faded into the background, and all that existed in that moment was the sound of my mom crying. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to react. I just stood there. And then there was something I realized I had to do. I had to call my other aunt. I had to tell her. Even now, thinking about that moment feels heavy. Because how do you do that? How do you pick up a phone and tell someone that their sister is gone? There's no right way to say it. No words that make it easier. I remember holding the phone, trying to think of what to say, and realizing that nothing I said would change anything. That was the moment it fully hit me. That this wasn't something that could be undone. That this was real. After that day, things changed. They didn't just go back to normal. They couldn't. My mom changed. You could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she reacted to things, in the way certain topics would bring everything back all over again. My cousin changed too. Grief doesn't look the same for everyone, but you can always tell when it's there. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's quiet, but it never fully goes away. It becomes part of you. Years can pass, and you can still feel it. In small ways, in unexpected moments, in memories that come back when you don't expect them. And for us, there was always that extra layer, that feeling that something about it wasn't handled the way it should have been. That even though we knew what happened, it didn't feel like there was ever any real closure. Because sometimes knowing the truth isn't enough. Sometimes the way things end matters just as much as the ending itself. Even now, when I think back on that day, I don't just remember the accident. I remember the hospital. I remember my mom crying. I remember standing there holding a phone, not knowing how to say something that no one should ever have to say. And I remember the feeling that something about it all was wrong. That it wasn't just an accident. It was something that should have had answers. Something that should have had accountability. But instead, it just became a story we carry with us. A memory that never fully settles. And a moment that changed everything in a way that never really fades. My best friend disappeared for a while, and even now when I think back on it, that period of time feels strange and unclear. At the time, it didn't seem like something that needed a big explanation. We were both in our mid-20s, and people come and go. Sometimes they leave town, sometimes they take a break from everything, and sometimes they just don't feel like staying in touch. That's what I assumed had happened. He was gone for about a month. No real explanation, no detailed goodbye, just gone. I remember wondering where he was, but not in a way that felt urgent. It was more like curiosity than concern. I figured he'd show up again eventually. And then one day, he did. He came back like nothing had happened. At first, it almost felt normal. He looked the same, acted the same in some ways, but there was something different about him too. It wasn't obvious right away, but it was there. Something in the way he carried himself. Something in his energy. He seemed more intense, more restless, like he couldn't sit still with his own thoughts. After he came back, we started hanging out a lot, almost every night. He would take me out drinking, and not just casually. It turned into a routine where we'd go out, hit bars, keep moving from place to place, and stay out late. Sometimes we'd end up partying until morning. It felt like he didn't want the night to end. At first, I didn't question it. It was fun. We were young, and that kind of lifestyle didn't feel unusual. But after a while, something started to stand out. He was spending a lot of money, more than what made sense. Drinks, drugs, whatever we needed, he was covering it. Night after night, without hesitation. It wasn't small amounts either. You could tell he wasn't thinking twice about it. I asked him about it a few times. He never gave a real answer. He would brush it off, change the subject, or just laugh it away like it wasn't important. At the time, I didn't push too hard. Some people don't like talking about money, and I figured if he wanted to tell me, he would. But then one night, I saw something that stuck with me. We were at a bar, closing out the tab, and he pulled out a stack of cash to pay. It wasn't normal. He had a thick bundle of money, easily $12,000 or $15,000, just on him. Not in a bank, not hidden somewhere, just carrying it around like it didn't matter. That's when it really started to feel off, because people don't just walk around with that kind of cash for no reason. And still, I didn't get an explanation. What I did start to notice more clearly was how he was living. After he came back, he was almost never sober. Drinking, using, constantly keeping himself in that state where he didn't have to fully face anything. It felt like he was running from something, even if he never said it directly. And he always wanted to be around me. He'd come over after the bars closed, sometimes late into the night, and we'd keep going, talking, drinking, sitting there until the sun started coming up. Those nights blurred together after a while, but one thing kept repeating. He would break down. Not every single night, but often enough that it became a pattern. At some point, after enough drinks, something would shift in him. He'd go quiet, and then he'd start crying. Not just a few tears, but real emotion. On the kind that builds up over time and finally comes out when there's nothing left holding it back. And every time he would say the same kind of thing. That he couldn't live with himself. That he had done something. Something bad. I would ask him what he meant. He never gave details. He just kept repeating that he couldn't deal with it. That it was too much. That he didn't know how to live with what he had done. And then eventually, he would calm down. Or pass out. And the night would end. This went on for a long time. Night after night. The same cycle. Until one night it was different. He broke down again. But this time he didn't stop himself from talking. He told me that during the time he had been gone, he had gotten involved in something. He said he had been paid to do things. Bad things. At first it didn't fully register. It sounded vague, like everything else he had said before. But then he started giving more details. He said someone connected to his dad's group had paid him to destroy a business. There had been some kind of dispute, and he was told to handle it. He said he set the place on fire. Then he told me something else. He said he had been paid to deal with 2 men who were believed to have hurt children. He said he was given weapons and told what to do, and that he was paid a large amount of money afterward. He spoke about it in a way that didn't feel like bragging. It felt heavy, like he hated what he was saying, like every word made it harder for him to breathe. I didn't know what to say. Part of me didn't believe him. It sounded like something out of a story, something exaggerated or twisted by drugs and alcohol. But another part of me couldn't ignore the way he was acting. The money, the constant need to stay intoxicated, the breakdowns. It all fit together in a way that made it hard to completely dismiss. After that night, things didn't really change. He kept living the same way, drinking, using, trying to stay out of his own head. But the weight of whatever he was carrying never seemed to go away. Years passed. Eventually, his body started to give out. At a very young age, he had his first heart attack. 27. That's not supposed to happen. After that, he stopped using. He quit drinking, quit everything. It seemed like maybe he was trying to fix things, to take control of what was left of his life. But the damage had already been done. 6 months later, he had another heart attack. And this time, he didn't recover. He died a few days after his 28th birthday. Even now, more than 10 years later, I still think about everything he told me. I still don't know if it was true. Part of me believes it. Part of me doesn't want to. Because the person I knew wasn't just that version of him. He was also funny, genuinely kind, the kind of person who made people laugh without trying too hard, the kind of person you enjoy being around. And that's what makes it harder. Because if what he said was true, then both versions of him existed at the same time. And if it wasn't true, then something else was weighing on him just as heavily. Either way, he was carrying something he couldn't escape. And in the end, it took everything from him. I still miss him. And I still don't know which version of his story was real. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. My dad spent most of his life working as a police officer. By the time I was old enough to really understand what that meant, I had already seen how the job stayed with him even when he wasn't wearing the uniform. It wasn't something he could switch off at the end of a shift. It shaped the way he looked at situations, the way he reacted to people, and the way he handled anything unexpected. Even when he was just going out to the store, he was still thinking like a cop. I didn't fully understand that when I was younger. To me, he was just my dad. But there were moments that made it clear that his world was very different from mine. Moments where you could see that he had seen things most people never have to see. One night something happened that I'll never forget. It started like a completely normal evening, and there was nothing unusual about it. At some point my dad said he was heading out to the store. It wasn't far, just a quick trip. The kind of thing that usually takes maybe 20 minutes, maybe a little longer if there's a line. He left, and we didn't think anything of it. Time passed. At first, no one noticed. Then an hour went by, then 2. Eventually, it had been close to 3 hours, and he still wasn't back. This was before cell phones, so there was no easy way to check in or find out where he was. You just had to wait and hope everything was fine. By the time he finally came home, something was clearly wrong. The moment he walked through the door, you could see it. He was completely soaked. Not just a little wet from the rain, but drenched, like he had been outside for a long time. His clothes were sticking to him, and his hair was wet. But it wasn't just that. It was his expression. He looked serious in a way that felt different. Not just tired or annoyed, but focused, alert. Like his mind was still somewhere else, still processing something that hadn't fully settled yet. You could feel it in the room. Something had happened. We asked him what took so long. At first, he didn't say much. That wasn't unusual for him. He wasn't the kind of person who immediately talked about things, especially if they were difficult. But eventually, he explained what had happened on his way back from the store. It was raining that night. The kind of steady rain that makes everything feel quieter and heavier at the same time. As he was driving home, he noticed something strange on the side of the road. There was a group of people gathered together, or they were standing in a circle. At first, it didn't make sense to him. People don't usually just stand in the rain like that for no reason. Something about it caught his attention immediately. That instinct kicked in. Even off duty, he couldn't just ignore it. He pulled over. As he got out of the car and walked towards them, he tried to figure out what was going on. From a distance, all he could see was that they were huddled together, looking down at something on the ground. His first thought was that it was an animal, maybe a dog that had been hit by a car. That happens sometimes, and people gather around not knowing what to do. It made sense at the time. But as he got closer, he realized it wasn't an animal. It was a person, a young girl. She had been hit by a car. The people weren't helping her. They were just standing there, looking. No one was doing anything. That's something my dad never understood, even after years on the job. When something serious happens, some people freeze. They don't act. They don't step in. They just watch. But my dad didn't hesitate. The first thing he did was take control of the situation. He told one of the bystanders to run to the nearest house and call 911. In those days, that was the only option. No one had a phone in their pocket. Someone had to physically go and make the call. Then he got down on the ground next to her. She was badly injured. Even before checking her fully, he could tell it was serious. The kind of injuries that don't leave much room for hope. But that didn't matter in that moment. You still try. You still do something. As he reached out to check on her, that one of the people standing nearby said something that stayed with him forever. "Don't touch her. You can get sued." In that moment, with a young girl lying there dying in the rain, that was what someone chose to say. Not "help her," not "is she okay?" but a warning about legal consequences. My dad ignored it completely. That wasn't even a decision, it was automatic. He picked her up and held her in his arms. He checked her, doing what he could, even though he already knew. He had seen enough in his career to recognize when someone wasn't going to make it. And this was one of those times. Still, he stayed with her. He didn't leave her alone. In those final moments, when everything is slipping away, sometimes the only thing you can offer is presence. Just being there. Not letting someone face that moment alone. She died in his arms, or in the rain, on the side of the road. He stayed there until help arrived. By the time he came home and told us the story, he had already gone through the shock of it. But it hadn't left him. You could see it in the way he spoke, in the pauses between his words, in the way he seemed to replay it as he explained what happened. I was 14 years old at the time. The girl who died was 13. She was just 1 year younger than me. That detail made it hit differently. It wasn't just a story about something that happened somewhere else. It was someone my age. Someone who could have been in my school, walking the same halls, living a normal life just hours before. And my dad knew that too. He held her in his arms, knowing she was the same age as his own daughter. That thought stayed with him. Out of everything that happened that night, but one thing stood out more than anything else. Not just the accident, not just the way people stood there and did nothing, but those words. Don't touch her. You can get sued. He said those were the last words she heard. Not comfort, not reassurance, not someone telling her help was coming. Just that. A warning about liability. That part never left him. And it never left me either. Because it says something about people. About how, in the moments that matter most, some people step forward and some people step back. Some people act. And some people worry about the wrong things. That night, my dad didn't hesitate. He didn't think about consequences. He didn't think about what might happen to him. He just did what needed to be done. And even though he couldn't save her, he made sure she wasn't alone. Sometimes, that's all you can do. And sometimes that matters more than anything else. The second year after I graduated from high school, a bunch of us from our class decided to go on a camping trip together. It wasn't a huge group. There were only 22 of us in the graduating class, so pretty much everyone knew everyone. We had spent years in the same classrooms, seen each other grow up, and shared a lot of the same experiences. Even after graduation, there was still that connection, like we were all tied together by those years. The idea of the trip was simple. We wanted to get away for a few days, catch up, and relive that feeling of being around each other without any real responsibilities. No school, no pressure, just time to hang out and talk. Everyone brought what they could. Food, drinks, tents, whatever was needed. It wasn't anything fancy, just a basic setup somewhere quiet, surrounded by trees, and away from everything else. When we got there, the mood was relaxed. People were laughing, setting up tents, starting small fires and opening drinks. It felt like one of those rare moments where everything just lines up. Everyone was in a good mood, and there was that shared sense of familiarity that made it easy to slip back into old patterns. As the evening went on, the energy shifted the way it usually does when alcohol starts to take over. People started telling stories. At first it was light stuff. Memories from school, funny moments, things we had forgotten about until someone brought them up. Everyone had something to add. The kind of conversations where one story leads to another, and before you know it, hours have passed. There was one guy there who had always been a bit different. Not in a way that made him stand out too much, but enough that you noticed. He was the kind of person who came and went even back in school. Sometimes he was around all the time, and other times he would disappear for a while and then just show up again like nothing had happened. After graduation, that pattern continued. He had become a truck driver, which meant he was often away for long stretches of time. It made sense that he wasn't always around, and no one really questioned it. That kind of lifestyle naturally comes with gaps. You're gone for days or weeks, and then you're back again. When he was around, he acted mostly normal. Maybe a little rough around the edges, but nothing that felt completely out of place. If anything, people just accepted him the way he was. That night, he had been drinking more than most of us. At first, it didn't seem like anything unusual. A lot of people were drinking, and the mood was still easygoing. But as the night went on, it became clear that he was getting more intoxicated than everyone else. The conversation started to slow down. People were more scattered now, sitting in smaller groups around the fire, talking in quieter tones. That's usually when things get more personal, when the loud laughter fades and people start talking about real things. At some point, he started talking. It didn't feel like he was trying to get attention. It felt more like something had been sitting inside him, waiting for a moment like this. He said it casually at first, almost like it was just another story. But the words didn't match the tone. He said he had killed his mom's boyfriend. For a second, no one reacted. It didn't register right away. It sounded so out of place that it felt like a joke, or something said for shock value. But he didn't laugh. He didn't change his expression. He just sat there, like he had finally said something he had been holding in for a long time. The group went quiet. Not dramatically, but enough that you could feel the shift. People started looking at each other, trying to figure out if anyone else was taking it seriously. He kept talking. He explained a little more. The guy he was talking about had been in his life for a while. His mom's boyfriend. Someone who came and went. The kind of person who wasn't fully present, who would disappear for days or weeks, staying with other women, then come back like nothing had happened. It was a cycle. He would leave, come back, cause problems, then disappear again. From what he said. But the man wasn't just unreliable. He was abusive. There had been fights. Real fights. The kind where people had to step in and pull them apart. The kind where things went too far, and everyone knew it. But nothing really changed afterward. He said he had stepped in before. Tried to protect his mom. Tried to stop things when they got out of control. But it never really ended. The situation just kept repeating itself. Until one day, it didn't. He didn't go into detail. He didn't explain exactly what happened, or how it happened. Just that it happened. And that the man was gone. Because of him. No one interrupted him. No one asked questions. It was like everyone had silently agreed not to push it further. There are moments where people don't know how to react, and this was one of them. And the person sitting closest to him reached out and patted him on the back. Not in a comforting way exactly, but more like an automatic response. Something to fill the space where words should have been, but weren't. Someone passed him a joint. He took it. The conversation didn't pick up from there. It didn't turn into a discussion. It didn't become a confrontation. It just stopped. After a while, people started talking about other things again. Not loudly, not energetically, but enough to move past the moment without addressing it directly. The night continued, but something had changed, even if no one said it out loud. In the days after the trip, no one brought it up. Not in private conversations, not in group settings, not even as a passing comment. It was like it had been collectively pushed aside. Not forgotten exactly, but set somewhere out of reach. Maybe people didn't know if it was true. Maybe they didn't want to know. Because if it was true, then it changed everything. It changed how you saw him. It changed how you understood the past. It added something heavy to something that had once felt simple. Even now, thinking back on that night feels strange, because there was no conclusion, no confirmation, no follow-up. Just a moment where something serious was said, and then left behind like it never happened. And sometimes that's what makes it stay with you. Not the answers, but the fact that there never were any. Years ago, I was working at the Las Vegas Hilton, right in the main kitchen. It was a fast-paced environment, the kind of place where everything had to move quickly, and mistakes were not tolerated. The kitchen was always loud, full of shouting, clanging dishes, and constant pressure. You had to be sharp, focused, and ready to deal with anything at any moment. Like most kitchens, the real challenge wasn't just the work itself. It was the people. One of the most memorable people I worked with was my boss, a man named Hussein. He was originally from Turkey, and from the moment you met him, you could tell he wasn't like everyone else. He had this intense energy about him, like he was always on edge. Everything he did felt exaggerated. If something went wrong, he didn't just get annoyed, he exploded. If something went right, he didn't just appreciate it, he reacted like it was a life or death victory. Because of that personality, we had a nickname for him. We used to call him Insane. It wasn't meant in a cruel way, at least not entirely. It was more like a coping mechanism for the rest of us. Working under someone like that meant you had to find a way to laugh about it. Otherwise, the stress would get to you. He could go from calm to furious in seconds, and no one ever really knew what would set him off. Still, despite all that, he was part of the team. You get used to people like that when you work long hours together. You don't question too much. You just accept that everyone has their own personality, their own past, their own way of dealing with things. One night, after a long shift, things were winding down. More of the kitchen had finally started to quiet down, and everyone was tired. Those kinds of shifts drain you completely. Your feet hurt, your head feels heavy, and all you want to do is relax for a bit before heading home. That night, Hussein did something unexpected. He went into the supply walk-in refrigerator and came back out carrying a full case of beer. Without much explanation, he set it down and told a few of us to help ourselves. That wasn't exactly standard behavior, but no one complained. After a long shift, free beer is hard to turn down. We gathered around, opening bottles, sitting or leaning against whatever space we could find. The atmosphere shifted from tense and exhausting to relaxed and slightly careless. Conversation started flowing. People joked around, and for a moment it felt like we were just a group of co-workers unwinding together. Hussein drank more than most of us. He had 4 or 5 beers pretty quickly, and you could see the alcohol starting to affect him. His usual intensity didn't go away, but it changed slightly. He became more talkative, more open, like the filter he normally had was starting to fade. That's when he started telling stories. At first it was normal stuff, talking about where he came from, what life was like back in Turkey, how different things were compared to the United States. We listened, half interested, half distracted, the way people are when they're tired and just passing time. Then the tone shifted. At one point, he casually mentioned that before coming to the US, he had gotten into a fight with someone back in Turkey. He described it in a very simple way. He said he had kicked some guy's ass. The way he said it made it sound like nothing serious. Just a fight. Something that got out of hand maybe, but nothing unusual. People get into fights all the time. It didn't sound like something worth questioning too deeply. He added that after that incident, he decided to come to the United States. Again, the way he told it didn't raise any major alarms. It just sounded like someone leaving their home country after getting into trouble. Maybe he wanted a fresh start. Maybe he wanted to get away from whatever situation he had been involved in. At the time, none of us thought much about it. We nodded, maybe laughed a little, and moved on to other conversations. It was just another story shared over drinks after work. but nothing about it stood out as particularly important. Life continued as normal after that. We went back to our routines, working shifts, dealing with the usual chaos of the kitchen, and interacting with Hussein the same way we always had. If anything, that night became just another small memory in a long list of work experiences. About a month later, something happened that completely changed how we saw him. We heard that Hussein had gone on vacation to Mexico. At first, that didn't seem unusual. People took trips all the time. It was normal to get away for a few days, especially after working in a high-stress environment. But then the story started to come out. Apparently, while he was in Mexico, he had been out drinking at a bar one night. After leaving, he was walking back to his hotel. At some point along the way, he ducked into an alley. The reason was simple. He needed to relieve himself. Unfortunately for him, a police officer caught him in the act. He was arrested for public urination. At first, that sounded almost ridiculous. It felt like one of those minor legal issues that might result in a fine or a warning. Something embarrassing, sure, but not life-changing. But it didn't end there. He was charged and convicted. That's when things took a turn none of us expected. At the time, the United States didn't have certain legal agreements with Turkey regarding extradition for crimes. But Mexico did. And once Hussein was in the system, his records came up. What he had described casually as kicking some guy's ass back in Turkey wasn't a simple fight. It was murder. That realization hit all of us hard. That story he had told us so casually, while drinking beer after work, suddenly took on a completely different meaning. The way he had brushed it off, the way he had minimized it, made it even more unsettling. We had been sitting there, listening to a man talk about taking someone's life as if it was just a bar fight. Because of the legal agreements between Mexico and Turkey, he was taken into custody and eventually sent back to Turkey. After that, we never saw him again. We could only assume what happened next. From what we understood, he would have faced the consequences of his actions back in his home country. And from what people say about the prison system there, it's not something anyone would want to experience. There's a movie called The Midnight Express that gives an idea of what life in those prisons can be like. Whether it's fully accurate or not, the general impression is enough to make you understand that it's a harsh reality. For us, the whole situation left a strange feeling behind. It wasn't just about what he had done. It was about how close we had been to it without realizing it. We had worked with him every day. We had taken orders from him, joked about him, shared drinks with him. We thought we knew who he was, at least on a surface level. But in reality, we didn't know anything about him at all. That's what stayed with me the most. The idea that someone can stand right in front of you, work beside you, talk to you like everything is normal, and still carry something that dark in their past. Even now, when I think back on it, that moment in the kitchen stands out clearly. The beers, the laughter, the casual way he told that story. At the time, it felt like nothing. But looking back, it feels completely different. Because sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones that look dangerous. They're the ones that seem completely normal, until you finally understand what's really behind them. When I was 7 years old, my mother started using drugs. At the time, I was too young to understand exactly what that meant. Later, when she talked about it herself, she said it started with pills, OxyContin, and similar things. Back then, it didn't seem that bad to me. She was still my mom. She was still there. The house was still standing. Life felt mostly normal. As time passed, though, things changed. Pills turned into heroin. Later, it became crack and heroin together. Our home started falling apart in ways I didn't have the words for yet. Around that time, my dad hit me for the first time. I hadn't cleaned my cousin's room properly. That was the reason. He picked me up by my arms and swung me across the room. I remember flying through the air and landing hard. Afterward, he bought me McDonald's. I was a tough kid. I bounced back quickly. I didn't even really understand that something deeply wrong had happened. My mom lost our childhood home not long after that. We moved into a barely furnished house. Sometimes she wouldn't wake up at all. There were days when my 4-year-old brother and I had no food. I was still happy somehow. Kids can normalize almost anything if it's all they've ever known. When I was 9, I went to live with my dad. Everyone agreed it was the obvious choice. Looking back, I wish I had been left with my mom. After that first incident, he hadn't hit me again for a while. But once I moved in with him, things started happening again. One day, for reasons I still can't remember clearly, he threw a screwdriver at me. It hit my knee and sliced it open. At first, the violence was sporadic. A slap here, something thrown at me there. It was unpredictable, which made it worse. I never knew what would set him off. Then he started dating the woman who would later become his wife. That's when everything escalated. He got a cat. One day, the cat did something that angered him. I don't even remember what it was. He picked the cat up and threw it against the wall, over and over. I screamed at him to stop. When I did, he kicked me into the wall. The cat died. Later, he got a dog. One day, we were gone for most of the day, 12 hours or more. When we got home, the dog had pooped on the floor. That was completely normal, but he lost it. He beat the dog so badly she was being flung through the air and losing control of her bowels from the pain. We didn't know it at the time, but the dog was pregnant. Not long after that beating, she gave birth to 5 or 6 stillborn puppies. My dad put their bodies into a Kroger bag and told me to carry it to the trash. I couldn't do it. I was crying so hard I could barely stand. He kicked me down the stairs and threw the bag at me. I carried it to the trash. Another night, I woke up on a school night to the sound of my dad and stepmother having sex. I was a kid and didn't know what to do. I threw a Beanie Baby at their door. My dad came into my room and beat me with that same Beanie Baby. People joke about them being soft, but when a 300-pound man is hitting a 9-year-old with one over and over, it hurts more than you'd believe. By the time I turned 10, the abuse was almost daily. I got lice once. While checking my head, he slammed my face into the table. I washed a dish incorrectly, and he waited until I was asleep that night to wake me by beating me. A lot of incidents blur together now. Punching, kicking, being dragged by my hair, being swung into walls. Those memories don't have clear edges anymore. Some moments stand out sharply. Once, he had me outside breaking down sticks and logs day after day. After about a week, I asked if I could have a day off. He shoved a broom handle into my throat. I couldn't breathe. I remember lying on the ground, gasping like a fish, staring up at him while he watched me struggle. Eventually, he decided I could breathe again. He knelt down and massaged my throat until my airway opened. I truly believed I was going to die that day. Another time, we were in the McDonald's drive-thru. I was sitting in the back seat, quietly reading. Out of nowhere, he ripped the broken lid off the center console and slammed it into the side of my head. I saw stars. He screamed at me that he had told me to stop humming. I wasn't humming. When we moved into another house, we ended up living next door to kids I had known before everything went bad. I was so excited to see them. I wasn't allowed outside, but one day I leaned out my bedroom window and talked to them. He heard me. He stormed into my room, grabbed me by the hair, and slammed me into the wall. That closet might still have a hole shaped like me. Once, he hit me in the head with a board that had nails in it. There was so much blood. I was lucky it wasn't worse. He once pressed a drill into my leg. I still have a perfectly round scar on my shin. When I was 12, I tried to hang myself in the closet using a belt. The bar broke. That's the only reason I'm alive. I was always hungry. I got the same amount of food as my 5-year-old stepsister. I learned to sneak food from the kitchen at night. That always got me in trouble. Eventually, my stepsisters learned that they could get into anything and blame me, and they'd be believed automatically. Once, they played with my stepmother's tampons and left them all over my room. I was stomped for that. Another time, they ate butter straight from the container. I was blamed, even though my hands were much larger and I didn't even like butter. That's just the physical abuse. For years, my real name wasn't used. He sent me into stores to steal things for him. He controlled everything. By 13, it had reached its worst point. My bedroom door was deadbolted from the outside. When I figured out how to open the first lock, he added another. My windows were nailed shut. I had a bucket in my closet to pee in. My bed was 2 couch cushions on the floor. Sometimes they forgot to unlock my door in the morning. I'd be trapped for hours, sometimes all day. That's why the bucket existed. When they found it, I was beaten for that too. Before the windows were nailed shut, I would climb out of my 2nd-story window and sneak back into the house through a dining room window I kept unlocked, just so I could use the bathroom. One day, I got suspended from school for something stupid. I had printed a poem calling a teacher a dinosaur nobody liked. I was terrified. I was sure that was the thing that would finally kill me. So I didn't go home. I got off the bus and walked. I wandered the streets for hours. I walked across the west side of my city and back. It got dark. I was starving. I went into a Kroger intending to steal food. That's when I saw a friend from school. I told her and her mother everything. She called the police. That decision saved my life. The police took me home that night. I remember sitting in the back seat, staring out the window, barely breathing. Every part of me felt hollow and tight at the same time. I had done everything wrong, according to the rules I had learned growing up. I had been suspended from school. I had run away. I had told someone what was happening in that house. In my mind, those things added up to one outcome. I was sure I was going to die. When we arrived, my father talked to the officers calmly. He explained everything away with practiced ease. The bruises, the cuts, the marks on my body, he said, were because I was clumsy. Accident-prone, always falling, always bumping into things. I stood there silently while he spoke over me, like I wasn't even present. The police didn't push back, but the only thing they addressed were the deadbolts on my bedroom door and the nails in my windows. They said those had to be removed because they were a fire hazard. That was it. No questions about why a child's door was locked from the outside. No questions about why a bedroom needed to be secured like a prison cell. Just a note about safety codes. It was around 9 or 10 at night when they left. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the couch cushions that served as my bed. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on them. I was terrified in a way I don't think words can fully describe. Not the sharp fear of something happening in the moment, but the heavy certainty that something was coming later. I knew how this worked. I had crossed a line. For years, I hadn't believed in God. It's hard to believe in something loving when your entire world teaches you that pain is normal and mercy doesn't exist. But that night, alone in that room, I prayed. I prayed harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't pray politely. I didn't pray with structure. I begged, I whispered, I cried. I said, "Please get me out of here. Please don't let me die. Please let me live." I didn't ask for justice. I didn't ask for punishment. I just asked to be spared. My faith has never been simple. It still isn't. But that night matters to me. It's one of the few moments in my life where something changed immediately after I asked for it. Around midnight, my dad came into my room. He told me to get dressed and get in the car. His voice was flat, no yelling, no threats. That almost scared me more. We drove in silence. Eventually, we pulled up to a place I had never seen before. A halfway house for troubled teens. A place called the Huckleberry House. He dropped me off and left. No goodbye. No explanation. I stayed there for almost 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt unreal. For the first time in years, nobody hit me. Nobody screamed at me. Nobody locked me in a room. The adults spoke to me like I mattered. They checked if I was hungry. They asked how I was feeling and waited for an answer. I slept without fear of being woken up by pain. I made friends with the other kids. We laughed. We talked. We shared pieces of our stories carefully, like we were all afraid of breaking something fragile. I dreaded the day my father would come back to take me home. Every night, I waited for that moment. It never came. At the end of the second week, one of the staff members told me someone was there to pick me up. They said my mom was waiting. I assumed they meant my stepmother. I felt numb as I gathered my things. I told myself to be strong. I told myself I would survive whatever came next. Then I walked outside, and I saw my mom, my real mom. She looked different, healthier, clear-eyed, sober. She had been clean for a year. She was smiling and crying at the same time. When I realized it was actually her, something inside me broke open. I don't think I've ever cried like that before or since. She took me home. She saved my life. Things weren't perfect after that. My mom struggled again later. Addiction doesn't disappear just because someone wants it to. But by the time that happened, I was 17. I was stronger. I had tools. I could protect myself. My life hasn't been easy. Trauma doesn't vanish just because you escape the place where it started. It follows you. It shows up in quiet moments, in parenting, in fear, in anger you don't always understand. But I have a beautiful 10-year-old daughter now. She is the light of my life. And what breaks my heart, even now, is knowing that I was younger than she is when my nightmare began. That someone looked at a child that age and chose cruelty over care, violence over protection. But I broke the cycle. My daughter will never know what it's like to be locked in a room. She will never be hungry because someone wanted to punish her. She will never be afraid to speak. She will never have to pray just to survive the night. I made sure of that. And that, more than anything else, is how I know I won.